My husband secretly funded an entire second life for his junior partner. I remained entirely quiet through all of it, but during what he assumed was a standard financial audit, the investigator looked across the mahogany table and asked him, "Hasn't your wife told you yet?" I didn't tell him when the first massive withdrawal hit the corporate accounts. It was a Thursday in late October. The number was $850,000, and it moved in 3 staggered wire transfers through a subsidiary I didn't recognize. I had been sitting at my kitchen island with a cup of black coffee, looking for a simple tax form in his leather briefcase. Instead, I found the routing slips. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a glass against the wall. I just sat there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, feeling a strange, freezing clarity wash over the back of my neck. I put the papers back exactly where I found them, down to the millimeter. I didn't tell him when the second withdrawal followed 14 months later. By then, the pattern was established. The money was bleeding out, quietly and consistently, masked as aggressive expansion capital. And I certainly didn't tell him when Simone started showing up to our charity galas like she owned the room. She was 28, bright-eyed, and walked with the unearned confidence of someone who thought she had successfully outsmarted the world. She would touch his shoulder just a second too long. She would laugh just a little too loud at jokes he told that weren't funny. And at the September auction for St. Jude, she showed up wearing the vintage Cartier watch he claimed the movers had lost during our relocation to the new house. It was my grandfather's watch. I smiled at her that night. I walked right up to her, holding my champagne flute, and I shook her hand. Her palm was slightly damp. I looked down at her wrist, at the familiar scratch on the gold casing near the bezel, and I told her the diamonds caught the light beautifully. She thanked me, entirely unaware that she was wearing a tracking device on her wrist. I said absolutely nothing, because I was patiently waiting. You don't interrupt your enemy when they are in the middle of making a mistake. Harlan Beckett didn't marry me for passion. He married me for my pedigree, my silence, and my family's pristine credit. I grew up in a world where money was old, quiet, and aggressively protected. I was the kind of woman who handled the estate without making a fuss, who never caused scandals, and who made tax liabilities vanish before they ever became a nuisance. He liked that about me. He counted on it. He thought my silence meant I wasn't paying attention. He didn't realize that I knew he built his entire fraudulent empire on top of my forged signature. I found the mezzanine loan documents 6 months after I found the routing slips. He had collateralized my family's trust to float the shell LLC he built for Simone. That was the moment this stopped being a divorce and started being a demolition. He hadn't just cheated on me, he had tied me to federal fraud. So, when Agent Reeves from the EAR's Criminal Investigation Division called my personal line, prompted by a tip from a forensic accountant named Stellan Calloway, whom I had quietly hired on a burner phone months prior, and said Harlan's offshore transfers required a formal inquiry, I didn't panic. I asked them to schedule it while I was present. I told Harlan it was a routine compliance check with our wealth manager. Nothing interesting, just some end-of-year boxes to check. He believed me because I had never lied to him before. That was the only advantage I needed, and I only ever needed one. The conference room on the 42nd floor smelled like ozone, expensive leather, and the bitter espresso someone had left on the credenza. Harlan sat in the ergonomic chair closest to the glass door. It was a subconscious habit of his. He always sat nearest the exit in rooms he planned to leave quickly. He was checking his phone, bored. I sat beside him with my hands folded in my lap and my face completely blank. Agent Reeves walked in carrying a thick manila file. He didn't wear a suit jacket, just a crisp blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He didn't look up right away. He took his time opening the file, flattening the pages against the table. The silence stretched until it became heavy. "Mr. Beckett," the agent set a ledger down between them. "Has your wife had a chance to discuss your asset liquidation with you?" Harlan gave him the smile. It was the easy, polished smirk he kept for naive investors, journalists, and women he thought he could handle. "I don't think so." "What liquidation?" Agent Reeves looked at me. I looked at Harlan. "Your primary came in trust accounts," the agent said carefully, his voice devoid of any inflection. "The ledger shows complete depletion. It was flagged and reported by your primary beneficiary 6 months ago." The smile died. It didn't fade. It simply vanished, wiped away in an instant. Harlan turned toward me slowly. The color left his face like water draining from a tub, leaving him looking sallow and old. What filled the space it left wasn't grief. It was rage. A deep, ugly, suffocating rage. "I told the private bank to call me directly," I said, my voice barely above a conversational murmur. "You always told me to handle the tedious financial paperwork." He stood up too fast. The heavy ergonomic chair rolled backward and hit the glass wall with a sharp crack that echoed in the quiet room. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Agent Reeves answered, leaning forward on his elbows, "that based on the federal wire tracing, recovering the $6.4 million you funneled into Simone's Shell LLC is legally impossible. The accounts have been permanently seized by the federal government." Right on cue, the glass door behind us clicked open. Simone had been waiting in the lobby. She'd insisted on coming this morning, calling herself his co-founder, standing outside with her iced matcha and her practiced posture. She had dressed for a celebration, wearing a tailored cream suit like she was already rehearsing for the lifestyle she believed she'd officially won. She walked in just far enough to hear the agent's final sentence. Her face didn't fall apart. It did something worse. It went completely still. Her eyes darted from Reeves to Harlan to me, while the financial reality finally caught up with her. The money was gone. Harlan lunged forward and grabbed my wrist hard. His fingers dug into my skin, pressing against the bone. "You knew about this?" I didn't pull away. I just looked down at his fingers, staring at them until he realized what he was doing, and let go. "Yes." "For how long?" "Since the second loan. 3 years ago." His voice dropped into something ugly and low, a desperate hiss. "And you said nothing. You just let Simone spend it all." all. Simone stepped forward. Her voice went soft and pleading, the tone of a cornered animal trying to sound domestic. It sounded like she'd rehearsed this exact speech in the mirror 100 times. Harlan, the money is secure. You know I invested it safely. He looked at her. It wasn't the way he used to look at her. It wasn't with warmth or desire. He looked at her with the same cold, narrow calculation he used when reading contracts he suspected had hidden clauses. Did you? He said. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She opened it again, her throat working, but nothing came out. The truth was sitting heavily in the room. She hadn't invested anything. She had bought real estate in her own name, artwork, cars, and lifestyle. And now, the feds had it all. Harlan turned back to me. His hands were shaking now. In 10 years of marriage, through market crashes and corporate audits, I had never once seen his hands shake. We are handling this privately, he said, his voice trembling with constrained fury. Quietly. You will not say one word outside this room. I picked up my leather purse from the floor. I stood up, smoothing the front of my skirt. I've been quiet for 3 years, Harlan. I walked toward the door, passing Simone without looking at her. I stopped with my hand on the metal frame of the glass door. There's a federal subpoena at home, I said to the glass. I accepted service yesterday. I didn't turn around. You think very carefully before you decide what fixing this looks like. I walked out of the conference room, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor of the corridor. I pressed the button for the elevator and watched the numbers count down. 42, 41. My heart was beating steadily, a slow, methodical rhythm. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. I stepped in, hit the button for the parking garage, and watched the doors slide shut, cutting off my view of the lobby just as Harlan burst out of the conference room. By the time I reached my car, my phone was ringing. The screen displayed Harlan's name. I silenced it and dropped the phone into the passenger seat. I started the engine, the low purr of the German engineering vibrating through the steering wheel. I backed out of the spot and drove up the concrete ramp into the bright afternoon sunlight. The phone lit up again. It wasn't Harlan this time. It was Caspian Thorne, a senior partner at the wealth management firm my family had used for 3 generations. Caspian was not the kind of man who called unless the building was actively on fire. I tapped the screen and put him on speaker. Hello, Caspian. Where are you? His voice was tight, stripped of its usual aristocratic drawl, driving home from Harlan's office. The Ayers just informed him about the Cayman seizure. I know, Caspian said. The federal freeze order hit our systems 20 minutes ago, but that's not why I'm calling. You have a problem and you have about an hour to decide how to handle it. I merged onto the expressway, keeping my speed exactly at the limit. Tell me, Harlan's partner, Soren Aldrich, just submitted an emergency authorization to liquidate the joint domestic accounts, the ones you hold with Harlan in the States. He's claiming it's to cover a margin call on the firm's end. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. The joint domestic accounts held the last $2 million of liquid cash that wasn't tied up in the federal investigation. It was the money I needed to pay Stellan Calloway, my legal team, and my own living expenses for the next 2 years, while the divorce and the criminal trials dragged on. Soren doesn't have the authority to liquidate a joint marital account without my signature, I said. He does if he uses the limited power of attorney you signed in 2021, Caspian replied softly. The one Harlan told you was just for the real estate closing in Aspen. Soren is trying to drain the domestic liquidity before the federal freeze expands to stateside assets. He's trying to save the firm at your expense. Can you block it? I can delay it, Caspian said, but the paperwork is technically legally binding. I need you to authorize an immediate wire of those funds into a secure, single-party trust in your name. If I do it now, it looks like standard wealth management shuffling before the divorce filing hits the public record. But if Soren pushes this through legal, it's going to get locked in escrow for 5 years. Do it, I said. Move the $2 million. If I move it, Harlan is going to know within the hour. He'll be completely zeroed out. He won't have enough to make payroll tomorrow. I don't care about his payroll. Caspian, move the money. Done. The line went dead. I drove in silence for the next 20 minutes, watching the familiar landscape of my life blur past the windows. The sprawling estates, the manicured lawns, the heavy iron gates. I pulled into my own driveway. The house was enormous, stone and glass, silent and empty. I unlocked the front door and walked inside. The air was cool, smelling faintly of the lemon polish the housekeeper used on the hardwood floors. On the console table in the foyer sat the thick manila envelope I had accepted from the process server yesterday, the federal subpoena. It felt heavy just looking at it. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood at the marble island. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text message from an unknown number. I need to see you. Now, I'm at the coffee shop on 4th and Elm. I stared at the screen. I didn't recognize the area code. I typed back, "Who is this?" The 3 gray dots appeared, hovering for a long time before the response came through. "It's Odette. Please, Harlan just called me." I set the glass down. Odette, Harlan's mother. I hadn't spoken to the woman in 2 years. She lived in a modest retirement community in Florida, living off a fixed income and the monthly stipend Harlan sent her. She was a frail, nervous woman who had always been slightly terrified of her son. If she was in the city, something was deeply wrong. I picked up my keys and walked back out the door. The coffee shop on 4th and Elm was a small, cramped place that smelled heavily of burnt beans and damp coats. I found Odette sitting in a booth in the back, her hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup. She looked smaller than I remembered, her gray hair thinning, wearing a beige cardigan that looked too large for her narrow shoulders. I slid into the booth across from her. "Odette, what are you doing here?" She looked up, her eyes rimmed in red. "He called me 10 minutes ago. He was screaming." Harlan was screaming? She nodded, a jerky, panicked motion. "He said the government made a mistake. He said his accounts were frozen and he needed liquidity immediately to fix a misunderstanding. He asked me to sign over the deed to the Florida house. He said he has a buyer lined up and he needs the cash by Friday or he's going to jail. I sat back against the vinyl booth. Harlan was moving faster than I anticipated. He was entirely cornered, completely stripped of his assets, and he was already trying to cannibalize his own mother's home to keep himself afloat. Did you sign anything? I asked quietly. No, he emailed me a document. I didn't open it. I got scared. He sounded like his father. Desperate, she reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. What did he do? Please tell me the truth. I looked at this woman, who had spent her entire life making excuses for the men in her family. I could have lied to her. I could have softened the blow. But I was done protecting Harlan Beckett's image. He stole, I said simply. He stole from his clients. He forged my name on federal documents. And he spent millions of dollars on a 28-year-old woman named Simone. The ears has seized everything. If you give him your house, Odette, he will lose that too. And you will have nowhere to live. She pulled her hand back as if I had burned her. She stared at me, her chest rising and falling rapidly. No, Harlan wouldn't do that. He's a good businessman. He told me you were having marital problems, that you were trying to ruin him because you were jealous. I let out a slow, tired breath. He told you that 10 minutes ago? Yes, Odette. I'm trying to save you from becoming collateral damage. Do not sign that deed. Her eyes narrowed, a sudden, surprising flash of hostility breaking through her fear. You've always looked down on us. You and your family. You always thought you were better than him. Maybe if you had been a real wife to him, he wouldn't have needed this Simone person. The cruelty of the words didn't hurt. It just clarified things. I picked up my purse and stood. Don't sign the document, Odette. If you do, you're on your own. I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her sitting alone with her cold paper cup. When I got back to the house, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, sharp shadows across the driveway. A black town car was idling by the front gates. The engine was running. I parked my car and walked toward the front door, keeping my eyes on the town car. A woman stepped out of the back seat. She was in her late 40s, wearing a sharp navy suit, holding a leather briefcase against her chest like a shield. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn in the fading light. Are you the homeowner? She asked, her voice tight. Who are you? I asked, stopping on the top step. My name is Delaney Fairfax, she said. I froze. Fairfax was my maiden name, my father's name. I don't know you, I said. I know, she said, taking a step closer. I'm your father's niece from his first marriage, the one your family pays to stay out of the country. She clutched the briefcase tighter. Harlan found me 6 months ago. He said you authorized a secondary trust using the family's European holdings. He needed my signature to bypass the primary estate controls. I felt the blood leave my face. The cold clarity I had relied on all day suddenly fractured. The mezzanine loans, the Cayman accounts. That wasn't all of it. How much? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Delaney looked down at the concrete. 12 million. It's gone. And the men who loaned it to him are looking for you. I stared at her. The crickets in the hedges suddenly sounded overwhelmingly loud in the fading evening heat. What men? I asked. I kept my voice entirely flat, refusing to give her the satisfaction of my panic. Not the mafia, if that's what you're thinking, Delaney said, hugging the leather briefcase tighter against her chest. Private equity. A shadow banking syndicate out of London. They do high-yield, short-term mezzanine debt for distressed assets, and they enforce their contracts aggressively. I looked past her at the town car. The driver was staring straight ahead, the engine still purring softly. Come inside, I said. We sat in the formal living room. I didn't offer her a drink. She sat on the edge of the white sofa, looking deeply uncomfortable in the immaculate room, and opened the briefcase. She slid a stack of heavy, watermarked paper across the glass coffee table. I looked at the top sheet. There was my signature. It was a perfect forgery. The loop on the I, the slight hesitation at the cross of the T. Harlan had spent 10 years watching me sign tax returns, estate transfers, and charity checks. He had perfected it to the exact pressure of the pen stroke. He approached me in January, Delaney said. He said you two were diversifying the European holdings. The primary estate controls required a signature from a secondary blood relative to bypass the decade law. He offered me $100,000 for one signature, and you took it, I said. I have debts, she said defensively. And he's your husband. He had your signature right there on the authorization line. How was I supposed to know? Because you know my family, I said, looking up from the paperwork to meet her eyes. You know we don't diversify through unlisted shell companies. You took the money because it was easy, and now they're coming after you. They sent a notice of default to my flat in Kensington yesterday, she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. A man named Holt Wyndham. He's their chief recovery officer. He said Harlan missed the third quarter interest payment. If the principal isn't returned by Monday, they trigger the default clause, which is what? They take the collateral. I picked up the heavy document and flipped to page 12. Schedule A. Collateralized assets. My stomach turned to ice. It wasn't just the European holdings. He had leveraged the family's voting shares in the foundation, the primary trust. He had put a $12 million lien on the core of my family's wealth, all backed by my forged signature and Delaney's desperate compliance. If Holt Wyndham triggered the default on Monday, the federal freeze wouldn't matter. The syndicate had a senior claim on the international assets. The Ayers would take the Cayman money, and the shadow bankers would take the rest. I would be left with absolutely nothing, and my family's legacy would be carved up and sold for parts. I have a flight back to London in 3 hours, Delaney said, standing up. I just came to give you the files. I'm checking into a residential clinic in Switzerland tomorrow. I can't be part of this. You are part of this, I said. Your signature is on this document. I'm judgment-proof, she said with a bitter, exhausted smile. I don't have a dime to my name, and they know it. You're the one with the assets. Good luck. She walked out of the house. I listened to the heavy oak door click shut, followed by the crunch of tires on gravel as the town car pulled away into the dark. apart. I sat in the quiet living room for a long time. The house was too big. The silence was too heavy. I pulled out the burner phone I kept taped underneath the baseboard in the guest bathroom. I dialed Stellan Calloway. He answered on the second ring. "Tell me you're not calling from your primary device." "Burner," I said. "We have a problem." "Bigger than the ears permanently freezing the Cayman accounts?" Stellan asked. I could hear the rapid clatter of a mechanical keyboard in the background. $12 million bigger. Harlan took out a shadow loan against the primary trust in January. He forged my signature and bought off my cousin to bypass the estate controls. The typing stopped instantly. "Who is the lender?" "A syndicate out of London. The recovery officer is a man named Holt Wyndham." Stellan let out a long, slow breath. The silence on the line stretched out. "I know Wyndham. He's a corporate vulture. He specializes in hostile liquidations and doesn't care about collateral damage. If he has a senior claim, he'll bypass the federal freeze and gut your family's trust before the divorce judge even assigns a docket number." "When does the default trigger?" "Monday," I said. "That gives us 3 days." Stellan's voice went flat and entirely professional. "Where did the $12 million go?" "It didn't go to Simone. She only got the 6.4 from the corporate bleed." "I don't know," I said. "I thought Simone was his only leak." "Nobody borrows $12 million in toxic debt for a junior partner's lifestyle," Stellan said. "He's bleeding somewhere else. Somewhere massive. I need the routing numbers from the loan origination. If we can prove the funds never entered a joint account, we might be able to argue fraud in the inducement and stall Wyndham. I'll text you the routing numbers from the file," I said. "Do it, and watch your back. If Harlan knows you moved the $2 million domestic liquidity today, he's going to realize you're not playing defense anymore." I hung up. I stood up and walked toward the kitchen. I needed to move. I needed to pack a bag and go to a hotel. The sprawling estate suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a beautifully decorated trap. As I reached the marble kitchen island, I saw it. The heavy glass door leading to the back patio was unlocked. It was slightly ajar, just a half-inch crack, letting in the warm evening air and the sound of the crickets. I never leave doors unlocked. I didn't call out. I didn't grab a knife from the block. I just stood perfectly still by the island, listening. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the dark dining room. Harlan walked into the kitchen. He looked terrible. His suit jacket was gone, his tie discarded, the top button of his expensive shirt undone. His face was gray, the polished, confident veneer completely stripped away, leaving something desperate and hollow underneath. He stopped on the other side of the marble island. He looked at the half-empty glass of water I had poured earlier, then slowly looked up at me. "Caspian called me," he said. His voice was raw, like he had been yelling. "He said the domestic accounts were frozen for an internal audit. But that's a lie, isn't it?" Soren checked with the legal department. The money was wired out to a single-party trust, $2 million. "It's secured," I said calmly. "Put it back," he said. "It wasn't a request. It was an order from a man who was entirely used to giving them and having them unquestioningly obeyed." "No." He leaned his hands heavily on the marble countertop. "You don't understand what's happening. The ears took the Cayman money. Simone is locked out of her accounts. My mother won't answer the phone. And now my own firm is Margin calling me. I need that $2 million by tomorrow morning, or Soren is going to vote me out of the partnership. Then you'll be voted out." He stared at me, his eyes wide and unblinking. "Why are you doing this? I gave you a good life. I protected your family's assets for 10 years. You leveraged $12 million of my family's trust in January," I said, through Holt Wyndham. Harlan flinched. It was a microscopic movement, a slight involuntary tightening of the jaw, but I saw it. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt too thin to breathe. "You found Delaney," he said softly. "She found me. She dropped the files off an hour ago." Harlan closed his eyes and dragged a shaking hand down his face. When he opened his eyes again, the anger was entirely gone. It was replaced by a cold, terrifying emptiness. "You have no idea what you've triggered," he whispered. "That $2 million isn't going to save you. Wyndham doesn't care about forged signatures. He cares about the collateral. If I don't give him his money, he's going to dismantle your family brick by brick." "Where did the $12 million go, Harlan?" He looked away, staring at his own reflection in the dark kitchen window. "I lost it." "Lost it where?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, a ruined man in a perfectly designed house. "Get out of my house," I said. He looked back at me. "This is half my house." "Not anymore. I filed the emergency injunction this afternoon the moment I moved the money. You don't have legal residency here as of 4 p.m. today. If you don't leave right now, I will call the police, and I will hand them the federal subpoena sitting on the console table." Harlan slowly pushed himself off the counter. He looked at me for a long time, scanning my face as if trying to recognize the quiet, compliant woman he had married 10 years ago. He couldn't. I wasn't her anymore. I never really was. He turned and walked out the back door, disappearing into the dark yard. I locked the door behind him and slid the heavy deadbolt firmly into place. I walked systematically through the ground floor, checking every lock, drawing every blind. My primary phone rang from the kitchen counter. I walked back and looked at the screen. It was Simone. I let it ring 3 times before I picked it up. "Hello, Simone, please," she said. Her voice was shaking violently. The arrogant, untouchable co-founder persona was completely gone. She sounded exactly like what she was, a terrified 28-year-old who had just realized she was holding a live grenade. "He's not answering my calls. The bank froze my personal checking. My credit cards are declining. I don't even have money for an Uber to my sister's apartment." "That sounds difficult," I said. "You have to tell them," she pleaded, her breath catching in her throat. "Tell the ears I didn't know. Tell them he lied to me. I thought it was legitimate venture capital. I didn't know he was stealing it from you. You wore my grandfather's watch to the St. Jude Gala," I said. Silence fell over the line. A long, suffocating, undeniable silence. "You knew exactly who you were stealing from, Simone. You just didn't think I'd ever bite back." I hung up, blocked her number, and walked upstairs to pack a suitcase. I packed exactly what I needed for 4 days: 3 tailored suits, 2 casual outfits, my encrypted laptop, and the physical ledger I had quietly removed from Harlan's home office safe 3 years ago. I didn't take any jewelry he had given me. I didn't take the silver-framed wedding photo from my bedside table. I zipped the leather weekender shut, walked downstairs, and left through the garage. I checked into a corner suite at the Four Seasons downtown under my maiden name. The room was aggressively neutral, smelling of expensive lilies and heavily starched linens. I ordered a pot of black coffee from room service, sat in the armchair by the window, and watched the city lights flicker against the dark water of the harbor. I didn't sleep. I just watched the sky turn a bruising, pale purple, waiting for the financial markets to open. At 7 in the morning, there was a quiet knock at my door. I opened it to find Stellan Calloway standing in the hallway. He looked like he hadn't slept either. He was wearing a rumpled gray suit, holding a thick leather portfolio and 2 paper cups of espresso. Behind him stood Maren Cahill, the senior litigator my family kept on a very expensive retainer for civil disputes. Maren was 55, sharp as a scalpel, and completely devoid of empathy. She was exactly what I needed. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They walked in and took the 2 chairs opposite the small dining table. Maren placed her briefcase on the glass surface with a heavy thud. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "I reviewed the loan documents you sent Stellan," Maren said, opening her laptop. "It's an ironclad mezzanine debt structure. Your cousin Delaney signed as the secondary guarantor, which effectively bypassed the decade lock your grandfather put on the primary trust. The syndicate has a legally binding lien on $12 million of your family's voting shares. Can we argue fraud?" I asked, sitting across from her. "Harlan forged my signature." "We can," Maren said, taking a slow sip of her espresso. "And if we litigate, we might even win, in about 6 years. But the moment we file that injunction, the primary trust gets frozen in probate limbo. You won't be able to access the operating capital. You won't be able to fund your family's charities, pay the property taxes on the estates, or cover my firm's retainer. Harlan didn't just steal from you. He built a trap that forces you to either pay the syndicate or bankrupt yourself fighting them." I looked at Stellan. "You said you were tracking where the $12 million went. Did you find it?" Stellan rubbed his eyes and opened his portfolio. "I did, and it's worse than I thought. He didn't hide it in offshore accounts. He didn't buy real estate. Then what did he do with it?" "He lost it," Stellan said flatly. "All of it. Last November." I stared at him. Harlan was a narcissist and a liar, but he was not incompetent. "How do you lose $12 million in cash?" "He tried to short a lithium mining conglomerate," Stellan explained, sliding a printed spreadsheet across the table. "He thought he had insider information about a massive regulatory failure in their South American operations. He leveraged the $12 million on short-term options, expecting the stock to tank. It didn't. The regulatory approval went through, the stock price tripled overnight, and his broker margin called him. He was wiped out in 48 hours. I looked down at the spreadsheet. The numbers were right there, stark and undeniable. Harlan hadn't been building a secret empire. He had been drowning. He took my family's money to play in a league he didn't understand, lost it instantly, and had spent the last 8 months desperately moving shell funds around just to make the quarterly interest payments to the syndicate. Simone's lifestyle, the Cayman accounts, the desperate call to his mother, it was all the frantic thrashing of a man who knew he was already dead. So he has nothing," I said quietly. "Less than nothing," Maren corrected. "Which brings us back to Holt Wyndham and the London syndicate. They don't care that your husband is an idiot. They care that the 3rd quarter interest payment bounced on Tuesday. Default triggers on Monday. If we don't give them $12 million by close of business Monday, they initiate the asset seizure. I moved $2 million of domestic liquidity yesterday," I said. "We can offer that as a good faith deposit to extend the term." Maren shook her head. "Wyndham doesn't negotiate term extensions on defaulted mezzanine debt. He liquidates. That's his entire job." "Then I need to speak to him," I said. "Where is their closest stateside office?" Stellan paused, looking down at his hands. "He doesn't have an office here. But you don't need to fly anywhere to speak to him." I looked up. "Why not?" "Because when a $12 million default triggers on a high net worth estate, the recovery officer doesn't wait by the phone in London," Stellan said, pulling his phone from his pocket and checking a message. "He flies in to serve the final notice in person." "He's in the city?" "He's downstairs," Maren said smoothly, closing her laptop. "He's sitting in the lobby lounge right now drinking a flat white. He reached out to my office at 6 this morning. He knows you're staying here. He knows you kicked Harlan out of the house. He knows exactly how much leverage he has." I felt a cold, tight knot form in my stomach. The sterile silence of the hotel room suddenly felt suffocating. They had been tracking me. They had been waiting for the exact moment the marital facade cracked. "Bring him up," I said. "Are you sure?" Maren asked, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I can meet him in the lobby and stonewall him through the weekend." "No," I said, standing up and smoothing the front of my silk blouse. "Stonewalling makes it look like we're panicking. Bring him up here. Let's see exactly what $12 million of toxic debt looks like." 5 minutes later, the door to the suite opened. Holt Wyndham did not look like a corporate vulture. He looked like old money. He was entirely unassuming, perhaps in his late 40s, wearing a tailored navy suit that didn't have a single sharp edge. His hair was meticulously parted, his face pleasantly neutral, and he carried a thin leather folder instead of a briefcase. He walked into the room with the relaxed, quiet confidence of a man who owned the building. He didn't look at Maren. He didn't look at Stellan. He walked straight toward me and stopped at a polite distance. "Mrs. Beckett," he said. His accent was clipped, educated, and completely devoid of warmth. "I apologize for the intrusion. I prefer to handle these matters with absolute discretion, which is why I bypassed your husband entirely. My husband is no longer a factor in this conversation," I said, refusing to offer him a seat. "You have a fraudulent lien on my family's trust. trust. I want it gone. Holt offered a small, apologetic smile. It didn't reach his eyes. I'm afraid the law doesn't share your view on the fraud, given your cousin's verified signature. And I'm afraid the lien isn't going anywhere until the principal is returned. He placed the thin leather folder on the glass table. However, I am a pragmatic man. I know you don't have 12 million in liquid capital lying around. I know the ears just seized your offshore accounts. And I know you just moved your final 2 million into a single-party trust yesterday afternoon. I kept my face perfectly still, but my heart hammered against my ribs. He had access to banking flags. He was seeing my moves in real time. What do you want, Miss Wyndham? I want to offer you a way out, he said softly. You don't have the cash, but you do have something my firm wants. I'm not selling my family's voting shares. I don't want the shares, Holt said, finally pulling out a chair and sitting down, gesturing for me to do the same. I want the foundation. Marin stepped forward, her voice sharp. The charitable foundation is a protected non-profit entity. It's completely walled off from the primary estate. You can't touch it. I don't want to seize it, Holt replied, looking at me, completely ignoring my lawyer. I want you to willingly transfer the operational control of your family's philanthropic foundation to our parent company. We need a domestic tax shelter for a series of incoming acquisitions next year. The foundation's 50-year clean audit history and pristine reputation make it incredibly valuable to us. He tapped the leather folder. Sign over the board seats by Monday morning. You walk away from the $12 million debt completely free and clear. Your family keeps the estates. You keep your $2 million. Harlan goes to prison for federal tax evasion, and you get to start your life over. I stared at him. The foundation. It was the only thing my mother had explicitly asked me to protect before she died. It funded the pediatric wings, the arts grants, the domestic shelters. It was the very soul of my family's name in this city. And this man wanted to hollow it out and use it as a shell for offshore corporate tax dodging. And if I say no? I asked. Holt Wyndham stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket with a slow, deliberate motion. If you say no, I file the default on Monday at 9 a.m. I will freeze your primary trust. I will force the liquidation of your family estates. And I will tie you up in civil litigation for so long that your grandchildren will be paying my firm's legal fees. He walked to the door, stopping with his hand on the handle. You have a very pristine reputation, Mrs. Beckett, he said quietly. It would be a shame to lose it over a man like Harlan. Have a lovely weekend. The door clicked shut, the heavy brass latch sliding perfectly into place. The faint sound of Holt Wyndham's footsteps receded down the carpeted hallway. Marin was the first to speak. She didn't look panicked. She looked offended. He's not going to wait until Monday at 9 a.m., she said, opening her laptop again. He's going to file the injunction electronically on Sunday night at 11:59 p.m. in a friendly jurisdiction, so it's sitting on a judge's desk before we even finish our morning coffee. We have less than 48 hours. I sat back down at the glass table. The coffee in my cup was completely cold. I took a sip anyway, needing the bitter shock of it. Can he actually take the foundation? I asked. Through a hostile debt restructuring? Yes, Marin said, typing rapidly. If you default on the primary trust, the syndicate can petition the court to appoint a receiver to liquidate the assets. Wyndham's parent company will conveniently step in as the highest bidder for the non-profit wing. They buy the foundation's legal shell for pennies, purge the board, keep the tax-exempt status, and pump their own offshore money through it. Your mother's charity becomes a corporate washing machine. I looked at the spreadsheet Stellan had left on the table. The $12 million Harlan had vaporized. Who was the broker? I asked Stellan. Who actually executed the short against the lithium conglomerate? Stellan traced a line down the printed page with his pen. A boutique firm here in the city. Sorrell and Keating. The specific broker listed on the margin account is a junior partner named Griffin Drent. I stared at the name. Sorrell and Keating. The name Keating felt like a physical blow. Petra Keating was the co-founder of that brokerage. She was also the current chairwoman of my family's foundation board. She had been my mother's college roommate, my godmother, and the woman who had given a eulogy at my mother's funeral that made a room of 400 people weep. Stellan, I said, my voice dangerously steady. Did Sorrell and Keating underwrite the collateral for Harlan's margin account? Stellan tapped his keyboard, bringing up a scanned PDF of the original margin agreement. He zoomed in on the bottom of the page. Yes, they verified the $12 million in collateral to approve the short. And they verified the signature on the secondary trust authorization? Yes, Stellan said softly, looking up from the screen. Griffin Drent's signature is right here. He rubber-stamped the forgery as legitimate. I stood up. The pieces were locking together, and the picture they formed was incredibly ugly. Harlan hadn't just stumbled into a massive financial loss. He had been facilitated. A junior broker at Petra's firm had approved a heavily restricted, forged $12 million collateral transfer without ever picking up the phone to call me or Caspian Thorne, my actual wealth manager. It wasn't just Harlan, I said, grabbing my purse from the armchair. Griffin Drent pushed this through. You don't approve a $12 million collateral transfer from a legacy trust without senior partner sign-off. Petra knew. Marin stopped typing. Are you sure? It's a massive regulatory violation. If a senior partner knowingly approved a forged collateral verification, the SEC would dismantle them. I'm going to find out, I said. Where is Sorrell and Keating's office? Financial district, Stellan said, checking his watch. But it's Friday, at 11 a.m. If they just had a margin wipeout and are dealing with a syndicate default, they aren't sitting at their desks, they're doing damage control. Check the dining room reservations at the Union Club, I told him. Petra has had the same standing Friday lunch reservation at the corner table since 1998. Stellan pulled out his phone. 30 seconds later, he nodded. Party of two. Confirmed for noon. Get your briefcase, Marin, I said. We're going to lunch. The Union Club was exactly the kind of place my family had belonged to for generations, and and the kind of place Harlan had spent 10 years trying to pretend he naturally fit into. It smelled of old wood, brass polish, and quiet generational arrogance. The dining room was softly lit, the tables spaced far enough apart that you could negotiate a merger without the neighboring table hearing a word. The maitre d' smiled warmly when he saw me. "Mrs. Beckett, a pleasure to see you. Will you be joining Mr. Beckett today?" I didn't blink. "No, I'll be joining Petra Keating's table." "Is she here?" "Just arrived, madam. Right this way." Marin and I followed him through the dining room. I saw Petra before she saw me. She was sitting at her usual corner booth, wearing a flawless emerald silk blouse, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. Sitting across from her was a man in his early 30s, looking pale, sweaty, and completely out of his depth. Griffin Drent. I walked right up to the table. Griffin stopped mid-sentence, his fork freezing halfway to his mouth. Petra looked up, her expression shifting from mild irritation at the interruption to a practiced maternal warmth. "Darling," Petra said, reaching a hand across the crisp white tablecloth. "What a wonderful surprise. I didn't know you were in the city." I didn't take her hand. I looked at Griffin. "You must be Griffin," I said. "I'm the woman whose signature you forged on a federal collateral verification last November." Griffin dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the fine china. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and terrified. He looked frantically at Petra. Petra's maternal smile didn't waver, but her eyes went completely cold. She slowly lowered her hand to the table. "I don't think this is the appropriate venue for a conversation like this. Why don't we go back to my office?" "We are staying right here," I said, sliding into the empty chair next to Griffin, trapping him in the booth. Marin remained standing behind me, an imposing figure holding a heavy leather briefcase. "Petra, this is Marin Cahill," I said pleasantly. "She is my civil litigator." "Marin, this is Petra Keating, my mother's dearest friend, and the woman who is apparently trying to sell my family's foundation to a London shadow banking syndicate." Griffin made a quiet, choking sound. I didn't know the signature was forged." Harlan said. "Shut up, Griffin," Petra snapped. The warmth was entirely gone from her voice now. It was sharp and brittle. "Harlan said what?" I asked him, ignoring her. "Harlan said he needed a $12 million line of credit to short a lithium stock, and he offered you a massive commission to push the paperwork through without calling me to verify." Griffin looked like he was going to be sick right onto the tablecloth. He swallowed hard. He had the secondary authorization. He had Delaney Fairfax's signature. The compliance department cleared it. "Your compliance department is a rubber stamp for whatever Petra tells them to clear," Marin interjected smoothly from behind me. "We have the metadata on the digital file. Mr. Drent, the verification took less than 4 minutes. Nobody called the primary estate manager. Nobody checked the IP address of the digital signature. You willfully ignored basic KI protocols to facilitate a massive margin trade." Petra picked up her water glass, took a delicate sip, and set it down exactly in the center of its coaster. She looked at me, stripping away 30 years of godmotherly affection in a single calculating glance. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. "I want to know why you did it," I said. "You're the chair of the foundation board. You know that trust is locked. Why would you let your junior broker underwrite a toxic short using my family's money?" Petra leaned back against the leather booth. "Because Harlan promised to route the foundation's entire endowment portfolio through my firm if the trade paid off. Do you have any idea how much management fee revenue that generates? Sorrell and Keating has been bleeding clients for 2 years. We needed the liquidity. Harlan pitched me a sure thing. The lithium stock was supposed to crash. He was supposed to clear $20 million in profit, pay off the margin, and move the foundation's accounts to me quietly. And when it didn't crash, I asked. When he lost the $12 million in 2 days, he panicked," Petra said coldly. "He went to Holt Wyndham to cover the loss so the primary trust wouldn't trigger a default alert to you. He took out the mezzanine loan with the syndicate to pay us back." I stared at her, feeling a deep, quiet disgust settle in my chest. "You introduced him to Holt Wyndham." Petra didn't deny it. "Wyndham is a bottom feeder, but he has deep pockets. I told Harlan it was his only option to replace the money before the annual estate audit. And now Wyndham is demanding the foundation to clear the debt," I said. "The foundation you are the chair of." "Yes," Petra said. "And on Monday morning, when the board convenes for an emergency session, I am going to vote to accept Wyndham's offer. You're going to hand my mother's charity to a corporate raider to cover your own tracks. I am going to do what is necessary to survive," Petra said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "If this goes to litigation, my firm is destroyed. The SEC will freeze everything. If we hand the foundation to Wyndham, the debt vanishes. Harlan takes the fall for the forgery, and Sorrell and Keating stays intact." I looked at this woman, remembering her sitting in our living room when I was a child, drinking tea with my mother, talking about philanthropy and legacy. It was all just a transaction to her. Everything was. I turned to Griffin. He was pressing a napkin against his forehead, his breathing shallow. "Griffin," I said softly, "Petra is going to throw you under the bus. You know that, right? When the SEC investigates how a forged signature cleared compliance, she is going to say you acted independently to secure the commission. She is going to fire you, and you are going to go to federal prison for securities fraud." He squeezed his eyes shut. "I know. I have a different offer for you," I said. Petra leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Don't say another word to him." "Griffin," I continued, keeping my voice calm and even. "My litigator is standing right behind me. If you stand up right now, walk out of this club, and come back to our hotel room to sign a sworn affidavit stating that Petra Keating explicitly ordered you to bypass compliance protocols on the Beckett margin account, Marin will represent. We will take the affidavit straight to the SEC and file for whistleblower protection before the market closes today." Petra let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "He won't do that. It violates his INDA. I'll sue him into oblivion." "An INDA doesn't cover illegal activity, Petra," Marin said pleasantly, "and whistleblower immunity shields him from civil liability." I kept my eyes on Griffin. If you stay at this table, you take the fall for $12 million of fraud. If you come with us, you blow up Petra's firm, but you stay out of a cell. Decide right now. Griffin looked at me. Then he looked at Petra. You told me it was cleared, he whispered. You looked me in the eye and said the primary estate manager had given verbal authorization over the phone. Sit down, Griffin, Petra said. Her voice was like cracking ice. If you walk out of this room, you will never work in finance again. I will make sure of it. Griffin slowly placed his cloth napkin on the table. He didn't smooth it out. He just let it drop. I'm already not working in finance again, he said. He stood up. He didn't look back at her. He looked at Marin. Where are we going? My office, Marin said, stepping aside to let him out of the booth. My associate is already drafting the whistleblower petition. Then we go to the regional SEC director. I have him on speed dial. I stood up and looked down at Petra. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands folded over her emerald silk lap, the picture of aristocratic composure. But her eyes were frantic. The foundation, the management fees, the desperate attempt to cover a $12 million hole, it was all collapsing right on top of her. My mother trusted you, I said quietly. She left the foundation in your care because she thought you were family. But you're just like Harlan. You just dress better. I turned and walked out of the dining room. Marin and Griffin followed right behind me. The next 48 hours moved with brutal bureaucratic efficiency. We didn't go back to the hotel. We went straight to Marin's firm and then to the federal building. Griffin Drent sat in a stark, windowless conference room for 6 hours and gave the SEC everything. He gave them the internal emails. He gave them the timestamps of the compliance bypass. He gave them the exact wording of the verbal order Petra gave him to push the collateral verification through for Harlan's doomed margin account. By Saturday morning, the SEC issued an emergency freeze on all operations at Sorrel and Keating. By Saturday afternoon, the federal investigators matched the timeline of Griffin's affidavit with the forged signature on the mezzanine loan documents. That was the kill shot. Once the SEC formally designated the collateral verification as an act of internal securities fraud committed by the brokerage itself, the lien on my family's trust was legally invalidated. A shadow banking syndicate cannot enforce a hostile takeover of a charitable foundation when the underlying contract is actively evidence in a federal criminal probe. Holt Wyndham didn't file the injunction on Sunday night. He didn't call me. He didn't show up at the hotel. Wyndham was a corporate vulture, but he wasn't stupid. He knew when a carcass was too toxic to eat. With the primary trust walled off by the SEC investigation, he had absolutely no leverage over me or my family's estate. The $12 million he was owed was now unsecured debt, which meant he only had one person left to collect from. On Tuesday morning, I went back to the house. I had spent the weekend in the hotel, managing the fallout, but it was time to go home. The sprawling estate was exactly as I had left it. Quiet, clean, smelling of lemon polish. I unlocked the front door and walked inside. The federal subpoena was still sitting on the console table. I walked past it into the kitchen and made myself a cup of black coffee. My burner phone buzzed on the marble island. It was Stellan. It's done, Stellan said. Caspian just confirmed the $2 million domestic liquidity is fully secured in your single-party trust. Soren officially voted Harlan out of the partnership yesterday at noon to stop the federal freeze from bleeding into their operating accounts. Where is Harlan? I asked. Nobody knows, Stellan said. His phone is disconnected. He didn't show up to his own termination hearing. Wyndham's people are looking for him. The Ayers is looking for him. The SEC just issued a subpoena for his communications with Petra Keating. He's entirely zeroed out. What about Simone? She moved back into her sister's apartment in Brooklyn. The feds seized her car, her jewelry, and froze her retirement accounts. She's cooperating with the Ears to avoid accessory charges, but she's completely broke. And Petra resigned from the foundation board effective midnight last night, Stellan said, a hint of dark satisfaction in his voice. Sorrel and Keating's assets are locked. Her clients are fleeing in droves. She'll spend the next 10 years in civil litigation, assuming the DOJ doesn't indict her first. Thank you, Stellan. Send Marin the invoice. I hung up the phone. I took my coffee and walked out onto the back patio. The morning sun was bright, cutting through the damp chill of the early air. The manicured lawn stretched out toward the heavy iron gates, perfectly green, perfectly still. For 10 years, I had been the quiet wife. I had managed the estate, handled the tax liabilities, and never caused a scandal. Harlan had banked his entire life on the assumption that my silence was weakness. He thought I was just part of the furniture, a signature on a page, a pristine credit score he could quietly drain while he built a second life. He was wrong. I took a sip of my coffee. The house was mine. The trust was secure. The foundation would outlive all of them. I stood on the patio and listened to the absolute unbroken silence of my property. And for the first time in a very long time, I smiled.